The challenge that shook the world. The gym was silent, lit only by the cold light of the spotlights. Mike Tyson, at the height of his fame, had invited a legend to a meeting that few believed would happen. Bruce Lee, even decades after his death, was brought back by an ancient ritual, an invocation that defied the laws of nature. The few present held their breath, waiting for what would come next. Tyson, his fists wrapped in black bands, glared at the man in front of him. Bruce Lee, impeccable in his yellow gi, smiled with that calm confidence that had made him a legend. Without warning, the martial arts master stepped forward and said, in a calm voice, "Strike me." The air seemed to freeze. Tyson hesitated for a split second, as if the weight of the story was holding him back. But then, with a guttural roar, he threw his right fist toward Bruce Lee's face. It was a blow that had toppled giants, a punch loaded with the force of a moving train. What happened next was so fast that human eyes could barely register it. Bruce Lee didn't move. He didn't dodge, he didn't block, he didn't counterattack. It was simply there, and the instant Tyson's fist approached, his body dissolved into a blur of motion. The punch passed inches from his face, but before Tyson could react, Bruce's hand had already touched his chest with the precision of a needle. A sharp crack echoed through the gym. Tyson was thrown backwards as if he had been hit by a truck, sliding across the floor until he hit the opposite wall. His knees buckled, and he fell to all fours, panting, eyes wide with shock. It wasn't pain he felt, it was something deeper, a feeling that every muscle in his body had been shut down for an instant. Bruce Lee remained motionless, hands relaxed at his sides. Then, with the same calm as before, he said, "Brute force is just the beginning. The real power is in precision, in economy of movement. You're fast, Mike. But speed without control is just noise." Tyson lifted his head, sweat running down his face. Never in his entire career had anyone touched him like that. It wasn't a knockout, it was something worse. It was proof that, in the face of true mastery, even the most devastating force became irrelevant. The few spectators who witnessed the moment were silent. Some tried to understand what they had seen. Others, more superstitious, whispered that Bruce Lee was no longer a man, but an idea, a force that transcended time. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Bruce Lee turned and walked into the darkness. Before disappearing, he cast one last glance over his shoulder. Train more. And so, in a world-shaking second, the legend was gone, leaving behind a stunned champion and the knowledge that some masters never die. They just wait for the right moment to teach. The weight of silence. The ring, once the scene of a spectacle of violence, now looked like a desecrated temple. Mike Stone remained on his knees, his arms resting on the ropes, his chest heaving as if he had run a marathon. Sweat ran down his face, mixing with the tears he refused to let fall. They weren't tears of pain, they were tears of shame. A shame so deep that it burned worse than any punch. The seconds dragged by. Someone tried to help him up, but he pulled their hand away with a growl. "I didn't need pity. I needed answers." How? The question echoed in his mind, repeating itself like a mantra. It hadn't been a coup. It hadn't been strength. It had been something beyond, something he couldn't name. And that terrified him. Outside the gym, the Hong Kong night swallowed the streets in mist and shadow. Bruce Lee had already disappeared, but his presence still lingered in the air, like the trail of a fire. The few who saw him leave exchanged nervous glances. Some swore they saw his silhouette dissolve into the darkness, as if he were made of smoke. Others, more pragmatic, shook their heads and murmured about conjuring tricks, about the power of the mind over the body. But Mike didn't believe in tricks. He stood up slowly, legs shaking, and walked to the locker room. The mirror over the sink was cracked, probably from some previous training, but it reflected his face clearly enough for him to see the bruises already forming. He touched his jaw, testing its mobility. Nothing broken. Just pain. A pain he knew well, but this time it was accompanied by something new: doubt. Train more. Bruce Lee's words echoed in his head, not as advice, but as a sentence. Mike always knew there were levels above his own. I always knew that, somewhere, there were better fighters. But he never imagined that the difference could be so absolute. He clenched his fists, feeling the skin crackle over his swollen knuckles. I'm going to train. It wasn't a promise to Bruce Lee. It was a promise to himself. The return. The months that followed were the loneliest of Mike Stone's life. He abandoned the commercial rings, the million-dollar contracts, the interviews. He disappeared from magazines, television programs, and betting circles. Some said he had retired. Others, that he was dead. The truth was that he had locked himself in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Los Angeles, surrounded by sandbags, ropes, weights, and a broken mirror, the same one he had carried with him since Hong Kong. His training was no longer about strength. It was no longer about speed. It was about understanding. He studied everything he could find about Bruce Lee, his writings, his notes, his training videos. He watched every fight, every demonstration, every movement, trying to decipher what had happened that night. And the more I learned, the more I realized that I wasn't just training my body. I was training the mind. The first few months were a nightmare. His body, accustomed to the brutality of the ring, resisted the fluidity of Bruce's movements. He stumbled, fell, got frustrated. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would wake up in a panic, convinced that I would never get close to what I had seen. But then he remembered Bruce's look, that terrifying calm, that absolute certainty, and he went back to training. Over time, something changed. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It was gradual, like the rising tide. One day, he realized he was no longer fighting the sandbag, he was dancing with it. The other day, he realized that he didn't need to think about the movements, they just happened. And then one night, while training in the dark, he felt it. The same feeling that had knocked him down in Hong Kong. It wasn't a scam. It was something more. A connection. An answer. Mike stopped, panting, and looked at his reflection in the broken mirror. He was no longer the same man. The muscles were still there, but now there was something different in his eyes. A clarity. An absence of fear. He knew what he had to do. The last lesson. The gym was empty when Mike arrived. It was the same place where it all began, the same ring, the same worn ropes, the same smell of sweat and liniment. But now, instead of a crowd, there was just a man sitting on a bench, watching him with a calm smile. Bruce Lee hadn't aged a day. You took a long time, he said, standing up with the same fluidity as before. Mike didn't respond. He climbed into the ring and assumed his position, his fists raised, his body relaxed. There was no anger. There was no challenge. Just respect. Bruce nodded, as if approving. Let's see what you learned. This time, there was no demonstration. There were no words. Just movement. Mike didn't try to block. He didn't try to counterattack. He listened. Every blow from Bruce was a question. Every deviation, a response. And, little by little, Mike began to understand. It wasn't a fight. It was a conversation. An exchange. When the first blow hit him, it wasn't hard. It went precisely, exactly where it needed to be, not an inch beyond. Mike staggered but didn't fall. Smiled. Better, said Bruce. And then, for the first time, Mike attacked. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a kick. It was a flow, a sequence of movements that came not from training, but from intuition. Bruce dodged, counterattacked, but Mike was no longer where the blow had been aimed. He was alongside, moving like water, adapting. For a moment, the two remained motionless, their bodies almost touching, their gazes locked. Now you understand, Bruce said softly. Mike took a deep breath. Yes. He understood. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being. Bruce took a step back and bowed. That's all I can teach you. Mike returned the gesture, his eyes burning. Thanks. When he looked up, Bruce Lee was gone. The gym was empty. But for the first time in a long time, Mike Stone didn't feel alone. Final chapter, the path becomes the wanderer. Mike remained still for long minutes, sweat drying on his skin, the echo of Bruce's footsteps still resonating on the bare walls of the gym. The silence wasn't oppressive, it was an invitation. He closed his eyes and let his slow, deep breathing fill the space between his thoughts. There were no more techniques to master, no more masters to follow. There was only now. When he opened his eyes, the world seemed different. The shadows were no longer threats, but companions. The air carried the weight of possibilities. Mike knew it wasn't the end, but the beginning of something bigger than himself. 3 months later. Mike's dojo, once a cold, impersonal space, now breathed. The walls were covered in Chinese and Japanese calligraphy, some by Bruce, others by masters he had never met but whose words had become his own. In the center of the mat, a group of students, of different ages and backgrounds, trained in silence. There was no shouting, no competitions. Just movement. Among them, a girl no more than 10 years old tried to imitate a packsaw with almost religious concentration. Mike walked over and slightly adjusted the angle of his arm. Don't force it. Let the movement flow through you, not from you. The girl nodded, her eyes shining. Mike smiled. That's how it started. The challenge. The invitation arrived without warning. A black envelope, delivered by a man in a suit who didn't say a word as he left it on Mike's desk. Inside, a card with a single sentence. The true test is not against others, but against yourself. Come. And an address. Mike recognized the place immediately, an old warehouse in the industrial district, one of those forgotten places in the city, where concrete mixed with rust. He knew what it meant. It wasn't a fight. It was a test. The date night. The warehouse was dark, lit only by light bulbs hanging from loose cables. In the center, a circle of candles demarcated the space. Mike walked in without hesitation. There was no audience, no judges. Just 3 people, an elderly man sitting on a wooden chair, a sharp-eyed woman standing next to him, and a third individual, with his back turned, peering into the void through a broken window. You came, said the old man, his voice hoarse like crumpled paper. I had to know, Mike replied. The man smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. Know what? If I was still running. The woman laughed, a dry sound. And is it? Mike looked at the third individual, who finally turned around. He was a middle-aged man, his face marked by old scars. He didn't say anything. He just took a stance. The old man raised his hand. There are no rules. There is no time. When one of you can no longer get up, it will be over. Mike took a deep breath. There was no anger, no fear. Just clarity. The first blow came quickly, a punch straight to the face. Mike dodged on instinct, but didn't counterattack. He let the man advance, testing, pressing. Every movement was a question, and Mike answered with his body, not his strength. The second attack was a trip. Mike fell, but rolled before his opponent's foot could step on his chest. He stood up in one fluid movement, as if the fall had been part of the plan. The third blow was different. It didn't come from the man in front of him, but from behind the woman, who had moved without making a sound. Mike felt the wind from the kick pass close to his temple. He turned around and blocked, but didn't fight back. Why don't you fight? Growled the scarred man. Because it's not a fight, Mike replied. The old man laughed again. He understood. The scarred man hesitated. For a second, the confrontational mask fell, and Mike saw something beyond anger, doubt. Fear, perhaps. What do you want? Asked the man, his voice breaking. Same thing as you, Mike said. Stop running away. The man lowered his fists. The woman backed away. The old man nodded, as if everything was exactly as it should be. The return. Mike walked out of the warehouse into the pale light of dawn. There was no winner, no loser. There was only the path. When he got home, he found a note on the dojo door. A single line, handwritten. The master is not the one who teaches, but the one who learns together. He recognized the handwriting. Smiled. Inside, his students were already waiting for him. The little girl ran to him. Teacher, are we going to really learn Wing Chun today? Mike knelt down to her level. No. Today we are going to learn how to do Wing Chun. And for the first time, he didn't feel the weight of loneliness. He felt the weight of the world, and knew he could carry it. The weight of the world. The days that followed were deceptively still. Mike taught not just movements, but the silence between them, the space where the real fight took place. His students, once restless, now moved with almost ritualistic precision. The little girl, Lena, was the most dedicated. She watched Mike's every gesture as if he were an open book, and he, in turn, let her read. But the world outside was not made of stillness. One night, while closing the dojo, Mike heard footsteps behind him. It was not Lena's light steps, nor the firm steps of her older students. There were heavy, dragging steps, as if the ground resisted each step. You can't run away forever. The voice was husky, familiar. The man from the warehouse stood in the yellow street light, his wrists still bandaged, his face marked by old scars. There was no anger in his eyes, just deep exhaustion. I'm not running away, Mike said, without turning around. I'm teaching. The man laughed, a dry, joyless sound. Teach what? How to bow. How to accept. How to stand. The man advanced, but did not attack. He stopped a step away, close enough that Mike could smell the sweat and metal on his clothes. My name is Elijah. And I didn't come here to fight. Mike finally turned around. Then why did you come? Because you're the only one who still knows what it's like to lose. There was silence. The wind blew between them, carrying the distant sound of a siren. Losing isn't the end, Mike said. It's just the beginning. Elias shook his head, as if the words didn't make sense. My master died. My dojo was burned. My students, he closed his eyes. Some of them turned into monsters. Others turned to dust. Mike didn't say anything. I knew there were no words for it. I want you to teach me how to lose properly, said Elias, finally. Mike looked at his hands. They had already held swords, broken bones, calmed children. But they had never held the weight of a man who no longer knew how to fall. Then let's get started, he said. Training with Elias was different. There were no refined techniques, no elegant sequences. There was only the impact, the sweat, the moment when the body gave way and the mind still resisted. Mike made him fall over and over again, until Elias learned not to get up angry, but with his breath still intact. You're not fighting me, Mike said. You're fighting what's already happened. Elijah didn't respond. It just fell. And he got up. A week later, Lena disappeared. Mike found the note stuck to the dojo door, written in a handwriting he didn't recognize. If you want to see the girl again, come alone. The old man knows where. The old man. Mike knew exactly who it was. The old man's house was on the edge of the city, where the streets turned into alleys and the alleys into shadows. He was sitting on the porch, smoking a cigarette that smelled of bitter herbs. He didn't seem surprised to see him. You took a long time, said the old man, putting out his cigarette on the floor. Where is she? In a place where children shouldn't be. The old man stood up, his bones creaking. But you already knew that. Mike didn't deny it. Who are they? The same ones who burned down Elias' dojo. The same ones who killed their master. The old man spat on the ground. They don't want fighters. They want soldiers. And what do they want with Lena? The old man looked at him with an expression Mike couldn't decipher. She is strong. Stronger than you imagine. Mike felt the weight of the world return, heavier than before. Where? The old man smiled, a toothless smile. In the same place where you lost everything. The warehouse was different. The walls, previously peeling, were now reinforced with steel. There were armed men at the entrances, and the smell of oil and gunpowder permeated the air. Mike entered through the shadows, as he had done before, but this time there was no hesitation. Lena was tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse, her eyes wide, but not with fear, with fury. Beside him, a man in an impeccable suit watched everything with a cold smile. Mike, the man said, as if they were old friends. Finally. Let her go. The man laughed. Or what? Will you challenge me again? He pointed to the armed men. This time, there will be no draw. Mike didn't look at the weapons. He looked at Lena. Do you remember what I taught you? He asked, quietly. She nodded, her lips trembling. Wing Chun is not about strength. It's about space. Exactly. The man in the suit frowned. What are you talking about? Mike smiled. We're talking about how you're going to lose. Then he attacked. It wasn't a fight. It was a dance. Mike moved between the men as if they were obstacles in training, dodging bullets as if they were slow punches. Lena, even though she was tied up, used her feet to knock one of her attackers off balance, and when Mike reached her, he broke her bonds with a single blow. Run, he said. She didn't run. He picked up an iron bar that had fallen on the floor and positioned himself next to him. I said that today we were going to learn how to do Wing Chun. The man in the suit shouted orders, but it was too late. The men fell one by one, not because of Mike's strength, but because of his precision. He wasn't fighting them. He was struggling with the space between them. When the last man fell, the man in the suit stepped back, his eyes wide. That's impossible. Mike advanced, slow, relentless. Nothing is impossible. It's just difficult. The man tried to pull out a gun, but Mike was already on him. One blow to the wrist, another to the throat. The man fell to his knees, panting. What do you want? He whispered. Mike looked at Lena, who was watching everything silently. I want you to learn to lose. So he left him alive. The next day, the warehouse was empty. The men had disappeared, and the man in the suit was not seen again. Elias appeared at the dojo at dawn, his knuckles bleeding. They're back, he said. But not like before. Mike nodded. They will come back again. And we will be ready. Mike looked at his students, at Lena, at Elias. They were no longer just students. They were a family. Yes, he said. We will be. And for the first time in a long time, he believed it.